So, which ring caused Sauron's downfall? It seems like an obvious question, obvious answer. Well, obviously, the One Ring did because he put his power and his life force into it. It's how he could survive all this time, well, having been killed, but that's also meant he has a fatal weakness. And sure, that's the easy answer, but I think there's a really interesting case to make that in fact it was the first or seventh, or whichever you want to say, of the Dwarven rings, which was the ring that got it all started, his downfall, that is. And I say that because reading Unfinished Tales recently with my book group, we read a couple of weeks ago The Quest of Erebor, which is, it's a really interesting retelling. It's one main version, then some notes of other drafts, because Unfinished Tales is kind of like, here's most of a story that, in my dad, this is Christopher Tolkien, most of a story that J.R.R. Tolkien wrote, or here is a set of connected fragments that really give insight into something quite important. And it has some really powerful, long narratives that are kind of good stories. Quest of Erebor is enjoyable, mostly at the level that it's Gandalf telling his part of the quest in The Hobbit. And that's fun. It's very nice to have that first-person perspective. It's quite cute, nice to hear. Or because you hear, like, The Hobbit is Bilbo's retelling, and you can tell that Gandalf's like, I'm not really sure. And he doesn't actually tell you all the information. He says, I'm not going to tell you everything. He says, I'm not sure if Bilbo realised what was really going on here. It's fun. But at a lore level, an insight it gives me... gave me a few insights lore-wise and wider theme-wise, but something I thought was really interesting was the way in which events happened. And this what got me started thinking was the order in which things happened was the first thing that made me think about it was that that Durin's ring, the ring in the House of Durin that Sauron had made for the dwarves in Eregion as Anatar the gift giver. He was like, oh yeah, here's a present. Now, just very quickly, the rings, the One Ring is Sauron's ring. It's a ring of power, of control over people. The three rings, the Elven rings, made without Sauron's help in the Second Age, seem to help with preservation and helping with growth, helping with hiding. So Imladris, Rivendell, it seems perhaps that ring that Elrond has helps hide it and preserve its beauty. Lothlorien, the fact that the particular trees, these both the Malon and maybe the Nimrodel as well, that these plants that are rare grow so well, that's partly due to the ring, and then we have many reasons to think that. So perhaps that's the what these rings do, the Elven rings do. Not just that, we know that the Ring of Fire, wielded by Gandalf and all the rings, also has some sort of lighting power. It's he's the wielder of the secret flame. So it's not just that, but you get the idea that these in some way are part of the natural order and help preserve and hide and grow. The human rings are rings, I take it, not of power in terms of domination, or of temptation, but of charisma and strength. They are given to 9 human rulers who use them to become powerful. And presumably they're, like, from the way it's described, that's the impression I get. And the Dwarven rings help the dwarves become richer. And you can see how each of these rings, even the ones not made by and corrupted by Sauron, there's something in which it matches that race. That for humans, it's about the massive humans and the appeal to lead them and to battle perhaps as well. And for elves, it's about preservation, about secrecy, about growth of natural things. And for the dwarves, it's about craft. So not just it's about getting rich, but it's it helps them craft, but it also helps them get rich. The dwarven hordes, we are told, become greater due to the power of the rings. Anyway, and that's what attracts dragons. And there's the parallel between dwarves and dragons, and the fact that dwarves can get dragon fever when they become too greedy, which is relevant in The Hobbit, of course. That's you can see that there's this parallel, that the corruptibility within dwarves is to make them dragon-like. Now, to return to our subject, Durin's ring, the ring given to the House of Durin, one of the 7 houses of the dwarves. The other 6, by the time of the fall of the Lonely Mountain in 2741 or whatever, I think it's something like that. Those have all been destroyed or taken by Sauron. Interestingly, Sauron wants the rings back after he's made them. He doesn't think, oh, I'll leave them out there corrupting people or letting me observe them or whatever the powers may be, but he does seem to want to gather the dwarven ones at least back. Maybe because the dwarves, ultimately, though corruptible, were not very corruptible, we are told. Whereas the humans all are corrupted and become the ring wraiths. So there is one ring left, and it is the ring of the senior house, the House of Durin, and the House of Durin is based out of, at this point, the Lonely Mountain, Erebor. Not Moria, Khazad-dûm, its ancient halls, but in the east, the Lonely Mountain, and it's held by Thror, the king. His son and his grandson survived the sack of the Lonely Mountain. And a relevant point is that Thorin is separate from his family at this point. His father and grandfather escaped via what turns out to be a secret entrance. This is an important plot point for those who remember their Hobbit. And they escape. Thror is slain in front of Moria, which leads to the War of the Dwarves and the Orcs. Great War of Vengeance, an enormous thing where the 7 houses of the Dwarves unite to take the war, because their king among kings has been slain by these orcs, and they go and get their own back. And Thorin is just aged into being old enough there, where he sees his cousin die in Ironfoot defeat the orc leader. Thrain, so his father, Thorin's father. They've founded a place out in the west in the Blue Mountains, and 40 years later, I think it is, we're told in the narrative, and I think we have the same date in the Lord of the Rings, Thrain goes off because he's trying to find out what's going on. He wanders, trying to learn of things, and he's eventually captured by the necromancer and taken to Dol Guldur. The necromancer is Sauron in disguise. Anyway, so this means that there's two things. There's 2 things here that Thorin doesn't know. Basically, a point is that Thorin does not know about the ring of the dwarves, the last of the 7 rings. He doesn't know either that his father and grandfather escaped from the secret entrance at Erebor. So Thorin doesn't know this stuff, and this becomes relevant for how Bilbo gets dragged into the quest, according to this narrative, because basically Bilbo is... there's real risk of Bilbo not being allowed to go, except that we're told in the quest for Erebor, Gandalf's like, but I had this kind of trump card, which was that I knew about, I realised I had the ring and the map that I'd gotten off Thrain, because Gandalf had met Thrain, not the ring, sorry, the map and the knowledge of the ring, because he had met Thrain in the dungeons of the Necromancer. And Thrain is mad, but they were able, because he's been driven mad by torture or loneliness or whatever, but he's able to communicate some things, and he gives the map and the key to the secret door and mentions the last of the 7, and the fact that the last of the 7 has been taken off him, basically, to Gandalf. So Gandalf has this trump card to keep Thorin on the hook, because he eventually becomes convicted, Gandalf does, that Bilbo must go, and this is part of a greater plan. And this leads to other things. The relevant point is that this plan to go and sneak eventually, rather than taking a small army that will lose, but to sneak into Erebor using a halfling, will lead to the defeat of Smaug. This means that there's a few things. Smaug is gone, and Smaug will no longer be a threat in the north, and that's relevant for the War of the Ring. Gandalf reflects, look, having those kingdoms in the north was really good, and it drew off some of the strength of the enemy. Equally, the fact that the way this worked meant that Dol Guldur could be attacked by the White Council early enough and couldn't be reinforced by anyone else, by the goblins of the north, which meant that Sauron was chased to Mordor, meant Lorien and Rivendell didn't fall, which means that in the War of the Ring, part of the force had to go to face those rather than go to Gondor, and vice versa. The troops in Gondor couldn't go to Lorien. The fact that all this kind of helped split forces in the War of the Ring and caused issues that like just domino theory slowly took out Sauron. And of course, the biggest obvious thing is that this quest meant that Bilbo found the ring. And Bilbo found the ring, and the One Ring, and that meant that Gandalf got it off him, gave it to Frodo, and Frodo volunteered eventually to take it to Mordor. And in Mordor, between him, Samwise Gamgee, and Smeagol, the ring was destroyed, and Sauron was unmade and defeated. So you can see why this quest is important, and it's fascinating kind of little narrative of Gandalf thinking of both the conscious thoughts he has, the semi-conscious thoughts that maybe he doesn't want to talk about, the kind of things he may have known in Valinor he didn't fully understand through his first life in Middle-earth, but also just the providential arrangements and convictions and spiritual moments where it's like, oh, we should do this, or maybe this, that's all very interesting, that all works. But Durin's ring struck me as I was reading it that this is a vital point. It's vital or important for one reason, vital for another. Important one, I was like, so Thrain is in the Blue Mountains for like 50 years or something, and they're making money, and they're establishing themselves, and they're building up a small hold. And no, Thorin will build that much more, and he will not have the ring. The point is that while this is happening, Thrain does have the ring, and I thought, maybe that's an influence. Maybe that helps Thrain become successful, and they rebuild a small dwarven kingdom, because over time more and more kinsmen come, many more than we see in the Hobbit, because the idea is that Thorin's like, I'm going to take this small army, presumably several hundred, to go and fight him, and Gandalf's like, no, it's not going to. He either says it's not going to work, you need to sneak in, or you need to do it this way. There's a few different versions Tolkien played with, but that leads to a far smaller body of generally speaking, close kinsmen and long-term allies to come on the adventure in the company of Thorin Oakenshield. So that's one thing, that the establishment of the hold that eventually leads Thorin to be in a strong enough position so that he feels he can challenge Smaug, which puts him in a position where he can bump into Gandalf and get this different plan to get a burglar. That may be partly influenced by the last of the Dwarven rings, which Sauron made. This is the important thing. This is why I think there's a beautiful irony in here. But the second thing, as I observed, I thought, why was Thrain important? Why should it? I guess. And why was he kept there? And what? And I thought, okay, well, it could be for any reason, but why was he kept there, etc.? What was the importance and centrality of this figure? And I couldn't get away from the idea that he was the bearer of the last Dwarven ring. And I thought, so it must be something, it just seems, but the text wasn't saying it explicitly, just implicitly. So I was like, okay, well, I'm still going to, this is a good theory, I'm happy with it. But then the very end, there is a note from one version of this kind of little story that Tolkien told. At the very end, he Christopher Tolkien says, after this, in this version, Merry questions Gandalf whether about Thrain's map and key. In the course of the reply, most of which is retained in the later version, as at a different point in the narrative, Gandalf said, it was 9 years after Thrain had left his people that I found him, and he had then been in the pits of Dol Guldur for 5 years at least. I do not know how he endured so long, nor how he had kept these things hidden, the key and the map, which are vital for entering the Lonely Mountain, which means that Bilbo can mess around with Smaug, etc., etc., etc. He had kept these things hidden through all his torments. I think the Dark Power had desired nothing from him except the ring only, and when he had taken that, he troubled no further, but just flung the broken prisoner into the pits to rave until he died. And Thrain had resisted this because he wanted to pass on the heirlooms. A small oversight, but it proved fatal. Small oversights often do. So in fact, it is explicit. Gandalf believes that the small oversight that led to Gandalf having the trump card to ensure that Bilbo joined the party of Thorin, which led to the One Ring being discovered, which led to the One Ring being passed to Frodo, which led to Frodo volunteering to bear it in the company of the ring, which led eventually to its destruction. All of that is because Sauron wants this last ring back that he made, and he wants it back. And there's something particularly fitting that it's the Dwarven ring that is the domino. He captures Thrain. He's defeated an enemy of the darkness who is part of the war of the dwarves and orcs, and defeated Sauron's potential orcs allies. All this, and he's captured him, and he's got the ring that he made, and so he's finally got them all, and that's nice. That feels very dragonish, doesn't it? That Sauron is having a dragonish moment, and from this, a set of events are set in chain. By that moment, by the greed for the Dwarven ring, which had been preserved from Smaug and preserved from the death of Thror at Moria, all the way back there, that led to Sauron's fall. So yes, though of course the One Ring is the ring that destroys Sauron, the ring that sets Sauron up to fail is not the wonderful elven rings which help his enemies, but instead one of the Dwarven rings, because it is Sauron's greed that undoes him and sets all that in motion. Anyway, you tell me what you think. I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Till next time.